Hello, everybody. Dr. Rick Wallace here, dropping in on you. Hope everybody is off to a great start this week. As you can imagine, it's been very busy here for me with so many different things going on. I want to thank everybody who is constantly showing love, who's checking in. Shout out to all my clients who also tune in. I am streaming this on multiple channels. So to each group and each platform, this message is going to mean a little something different to you. This conversation is going to mean a little something different to you. But at the end of the day, it is still relevant and prevalent, and it must be confronted. It must be dealt with. And I'm talking specifically about childhood sexual abuse, childhood, adverse childhood experiences, and the prevalence within the Black community. This isn't to marginalize any other group, but we must always start at home. We must always be focused and centered on making sure we are okay. We have a tendency as a people, because of how we are simply spiritually made, to want to fight everyone else's battles and leave very little for ourselves. And it shows up in the results that we produce. And so I am here to talk about the relevance of something that I'm immensely passionate about, something that I've been aware of and involved in for years. And the conversation is uncomfortable. And the discomfort comes from a lot of different places. And I just want to kind of touch on this today. We're not going to close the gate or the gap today. We're not going to get everything worked out, but I think we have to start having these hard conversations. It's easy to talk about how we feel about law enforcement. It's easy to talk about how we feel about discrimination in the workplace. It's easy to talk about the lack of equity when it comes to financial opportunities. It's easy to talk about those because the enemy's on the outside. Well, I subscribe to an old African proverb that says, when there's no enemy on the inside, the enemy on the outside can do us no harm. I think that a great deal of our vulnerability comes from the fact that we are imploding on the inside, that we're not taking care of internal issues in the manner in which we should. We're not dealing with the things on the inside that are festering, that are producing subpar realities across the board, whether it's our identity crisis, whether it's our relationship with money, whether it is the ever widening gap and void between Black men and Black women that is easily stirred by external forces, and the vitriol and conflict tends to escalate. All of these things come from internal disruptions that we've never dealt with. When you don't deal with trauma, you tend to become someone who traumatizes other people. When you don't deal with hurt, you tend to become someone who hurts someone else. When you don't deal with your fear of abandonment, you tend to become a person that cannot build strong relationships. All of these things are going to show up in whether or not you are a pro-social individual, whether you can be considered properly socialized in a manner that presents yourself functional and an asset to your collective. And so when we talk about this big elephant in the room, when we talk about childhood sexual abuse, we have to look at it in that light, that we are literally destroying ourselves from within. We're literally creating an environment because it's too comfortable to confront, because it puts us in a situation. I had someone tell me the other day, a client, that the mother was protecting the integrity of the family by creating a narrative around a very traumatizing event that put the family in a better light. No, the mother wasn't protecting the integrity of the family. The mother was protecting the reputation of the family. Two totally different things. The integrity speaks to the adhesion and the adherence to a particular value system, despite difficulties, frustrations, discomfort, and everything else. The integrity is the strength of character. Integrity is what says this is how we operate. This is what we believe in, and we operate on those beliefs. When you're sitting up and saying, okay, my child's been harmed, but we don't want the story to get out because it's going to hurt the family. It's going to make the family look bad. You're protecting the reputation. You're protecting how you're perceived versus protecting the family itself. And we have way too many of that. We have situations in which leaders in the church have advised women not to report what was going on in the home because it would disrupt the home, and more than likely the perpetrator would be arrested, and it will create all types. And we have lived and dealt with that, and we are still. And this all started with me. Probably 20 years ago, maybe 18, 20 years ago, early 2000s. So maybe 18 years ago. I'm sitting up and I'm like in this little 6-month gap where it seems every Black female that came to me, when we got to the core of what was causing whatever issues they came to me for. See, the thing is, most people come to get help, or most people are concerned and aware of their symptoms, how they're behaving, how they're performing, what they're doing, what they're not doing. All of these different things are symptoms. Very few people know how to search for causality. Very few people are trained to seek out cause. See, the cause is the source. When you deal with the source, you can deal with the symptoms. When you address the source, you address the symptoms. But when you try to cover up and suppress the symptoms, you make the system step to the background, but the core issue is still there. So the festation of the vitriol and the toxicity is still there. Whether you are successful at suppressing the symptoms of the illness, it's still there. It's still causing damage underneath the surface. You've got to deal with the cause. So here we are. We're now looking at people that are coming to me, but they're not coming to me because, okay, this happened to me when I was 6. This happened to me when I was 10. They're coming to me, look, I can't maintain a good relationship. I'm on my 2nd or 3rd marriage. I tend to pick the wrong type of men. All of these, now I'm speaking right now specifically to Black women, but before this over, we're going to talk about the prevalence of the same thing with Black men. We just don't report it as much because we don't know how to process the fact that we've been violated and how that looks to everyone else, because it can lead us to question who we are. So we tend to even suppress it more. But I'm gonna tell you, even with the suppression of our reports, 1 in 8 Black boys are being molested as a minor, and we're gonna get that. But when it came to women, I'm like, okay, something's not right here. Either there's a phenomenon that we have done a great job at suppressing, and now it's beginning to erupt and it can't be hidden, or all of the women who've been violated have decided, hey, let's head over to Dr. Rick. And so I called a colleague. I mentioned this during the video yesterday. I called a colleague and I'm like, hey, man, is it me or is it a lot of Black women who were violated as children? He said, Doc, it's not you. I'm getting the same thing. So then I start to do research. And on the liberal side of the empirical and pragmatic data that I was able to uncover, we're talking 60% of Black women reporting that they were violated. So in some way, officially divulging it to a professional or someone who can take an official account of it, 60%. That's the liberal number. Now on the conservative end, because you got to understand, data as it is collected and presented in research is often influenced by those who are funding the research. That's why I give a lot more gravity to independent research. Why? Because the ones that funding it don't have a horse in the race. When Pfizer is funding the research on the vaccine, you can guarantee that the research is weighted towards saying the vaccine is safe. So I'm not looking for Pfizer funded data on the vaccine. I'm looking for someone who invested money that doesn't win or lose either way with the data, just wanting the truth. Now, on the flip side, someone who is absolutely anti-vaccine funding it still is going to produce a weighted return. I need the truth. I don't need a weighted, but you got to look at all the data out there, because there's still facts within the data. You got to be able to extract it all and make it make sense. But on the conservative end of these numbers, we're talking about 40% of Black women reporting. So on the conservative end, 40% of Black women. On the more liberal end, 60%. So somewhere around half of the Black women in this country were in some way sexually violated as a child. More importantly, you find out that in most instances, it was not appropriately dealt with. Now, anyone who understands trauma is the area I specialize in. Anyone who understands trauma understands that the traumatic experience is more than an emotional experience. It's more than a spiritual. It's more than mental. Most people think of PTSD as being a mental condition. What people don't realize is that your body actually experiences the trauma before your mind. Your body takes the score of trauma experience. So your body is the first trigger of any type of traumatic memory. You feel it here before you sense it here. And that's why normally triggered people end up way over here before they can get control of it. Why? Because it didn't start in some way that they could rationalize it. It started where the human existence is most instinctive, in the body. When the body senses something in fear, it reacts to it. It doesn't think and rationalize it. When you hear a gunshot, you don't wait and figure out, is that something dangerous, and then duck. You naturally duck. Well, in trauma, you got these things going on. But what happens is, when a child experiences this, it's a traumatic experience. It happens on an elevated genetic level, or an epigenetic level, meaning that right above the genetic sequence, genes are being activated and deactivated. Genes are being down-regulated and up-regulated. And what happens is all types of things that happen. There's a ton of research out there now that talks about adverse childhood experiences. What are those? Adverse childhood experiences are things that children experience as a child that have an adverse effect on their mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical health. What we know now about adverse childhood experiences is that they have lifelong consequences. It's not something that you just experience as a child and then it's all over, you grow out of it. You know, that we talk about childhood resilience or adolescent resilience a lot, but we don't really truly understand. You know, yes, children are resilient. Children can overcome a lot, but there are certain things that have to be dealt with and confronted, or they don't overcome. What we know about adverse childhood experiences, I'll give you an idea of what some adverse childhood experiences are. Something as simple as parents divorcing, highly traumatic to a child. Abusive parents in the home, and the abuse could be physical, emotional, and verbal. Having a parent who's chemically dependent, an alcoholic, a drug addict, having a parent go to prison. And those are just some of the adverse childhood experiences. Feeling neglected, having a parent not in the home, not knowing a parent. All of these are considered adverse childhood experiences. And the way that we keep up with adverse childhood experiences is we give every adverse experience in and of itself a point. So if your parents break up, that's 1 point. If you had a parent who physically abused you, that's a point. If you were molested as a child, that's a point. So there are all these different adverse childhood experiences, and there's a long list of them. But here's the thing. When you get to 3 and 4 adverse child, just 3 and 4 points, you start to talk about a massive swing in the performance and the behavior and the physical health of the child, not just as a child, but over the course of their life. Anyone with 4 adverse childhood experiences is 12 times more likely to attempt suicide at some point in their life. 4 points, just 4. At 3 points, 5 times more likely to develop diabetes. At 4 times more likely to develop ischemic heart failure, the number one killer, coronary heart disease. These are lifelong conditions. Oh, check it out. But now we're getting into an even deeper element of epigenetics. ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, is just a component or subcategory of epigenetics, which I can't get into depth here, but this is something that I've spent a lot of time developing a certain level of expertise in order to understand our health, our behavior, and how trauma is projected over generations. This is how it started years ago, and it's developed into an understanding of a lot about us. But here we go. Okay, so 2 ways epigenetics influence future health. First and foremost, you have 23 chromosomes from the mother, 23 chromosomes for the father, creates the 46 chromosomes that make you. Now, epigenetic tags are created every time there's a traumatic experience in your life that's emphatic. That emphatic thing actually imprints on your genetic code. It doesn't change the genetic sequence in your DNA, or at least we used to think. But we know that it can shorten lifespan and a bunch of other things that's directly associated with DNA expression. But let's keep it simple. On the surface, there are these tags. Now, what happens is the body has two ways of reproducing on a cellular level. The first is called mitosis. Mitosis is the way you reproduce every day. Cells regenerate identical cells, and then they die off. So one cell creates 2 identical cells like itself, then it dies off. That's called mitosis. Well, there's also the reproductive side of human reproduction, and it's seen best in the female. Why? Because every month, while a woman is fertile in her fertile years, she has a cycle, and there's a point in time when an egg is created. If the egg isn't fertilized, the egg is disposed of, and the cycle re-evolves. This is called meiosis. Well, in the process of meiosis, tags are disposed of. Okay, so what am I getting at? So nature, or God, created a situation in which, in the ideal situation, the parent isn't passing down genetic trauma. But here's what we find out, that if the trauma is emphatic enough, some of the tags get through. We know that because we've studied the traumatic experiences of other groups, including the Jews from the Holocaust. We know that there were situations where grandchildren of Holocaust survivors who were not even alive during the Holocaust were experiencing dreams of real events in the Holocaust that their grandparents had not told them about. And so we started to look at it. That's the front end of epigenetics, how it's passed down through procreation. The second part of genetics is environmental experiences, meaning that you can take identical twins who are, in essence, the same person split in half before birth and developing into 2 people, meaning the fingerprints are the same, the DNA sequence is the same, they're identical. But as they age, depending on life experiences, they become more distinct in appearance. Why? Because their life experiences is setting up how they age. The one who is going through the more stressful life will age faster. The one who is going through the most stressful life will become more proclivitous to develop some form of disease. Why? Because stress and trauma will activate, or what we call upregulate, disease genes. Cancer is the activation or the upregulation of a certain number of cancer genes, depending on what type of cancer. Cancer just does not come out of anywhere. Can diet do it? Yes. But primarily you're looking at environment, what you expose yourself. Nothing is more influential, in my opinion, than your environment. If you're living in a stressful environment, you are upregulating your disease genes and you're more likely to get sick. That's why a kid who has 4 ACEs will be more likely to develop ischemic heart failure, be more likely to develop type 2 diabetes, be more likely to develop other forms of chronic chronic illnesses like lupus, because it's in the genetic expression. You're upregulating negative genes. Now, the beautiful thing about this is we also find out that if we can create the right amount of peace, if we can create the right amount of positivity, if we can create the right amount of hope, we can downregulate negative genes and upregulate the healing gene. We are designed to heal ourselves. We're designed to heal ourselves. But we live in a world where the environment isn't conducive to self-healing. Most people talk about faith but have no clue what it is. They don't know how to operate in it. They panic at every sign of any trouble. They become fearful at any sign of upheaval or disarray. Why? Because we've been conditioned to be afraid. That's how we're controlled. That's how we're manipulated. I know it might seem a little off, but I'm trying to get you to understand the magnitude of what we're dealing with and why we have to take what our women have gone through seriously. So we understand that when something happens to a child, male or female, in childhood, and then for the most part, we find out that we're hiding it and sweeping it under the rug. It's this big elephant that everybody knows about, but nobody wants to talk about. Why? Because it puts us front and center with our own ugliness. It puts us front and center with our own failures. It puts us front and center with the very, very clear idea that a lot of our problems are initiating from within. If there's no enemy on the inside, the enemy on the outside can do us no harm. That proverb has power. When you start to really, truly empower yourself internally, when you start to really, truly cleanse yourself internally, when you start to really, truly step into who you are and you start to stand guard over who you are internally, you get rid of the toxicity, you get rid of the dysfunction, you get rid of all the outside. I'm not talking about getting around a bunch of yes people who lie to you about what you're doing and who you are and don't hold you accountable. I'm talking about all the negative stuff that's literally sucking the life out of who you are. That's not just an emotional experience. It's going to show up in your physical health. It's going to show up in your long-term performance, in relationships, in jobs, in aspirations. You're going to perform at a lower level because you're simply not physically, emotionally, and spiritually capable of doing more. You're having the life sucked out of you. Now let's deal with this. There's so much of this that can be traced back to slavery, but does it give us an excuse? Absolutely not. We can't be responsible for what we could not control, but we will always be responsible for how we respond to it. Same thing with every child that I work with, every adult that I work with that had problems. Look, you can't change what they did. Nothing in the world is going to change. So the first thing you do is you have to remind yourself that it's not your fault. You had absolutely nothing to do with it. It was nothing that you could have done to stop that. Stop carrying the shame of what someone else did because you're a part of the family. So often I see families shaming the victim to protect the perpetrator. You can't talk about that. How dare you expose that? How dare you? My wife caught a lot of flack about what she exposed in her book. But that was her healing process. Nobody had a right to stop her. Nobody had a right, because if it was dealt with the way it's supposed to, it wouldn't have gotten to this point. When we sit up and we talk about how our women are distrustful, we have to ask the question, why? Are they there because nothing happened and they just have been told not to trust us? And see, the thing is, it's not just whether they trust you to be right by them. They need to know that when they're in your presence, they're safe. But how can they feel safe when in the presence, when many times the person who should have been the one protecting them is the one that harmed them? How can they feel safe? We're talking about emotional and mental processing now. We are going to have to truly reel this thing in. I know there are all these different feelings. My problem is, I was talking to my wife, Marion, less than a week ago, and I was so heavy, I was almost to tears. I literally was considering walking away from my profession because I'm tired of getting a client and I'm thinking, we're finna show you how to start your business. We're finna show you how to go to this and get to this level, because that's what they're coming from. They're coming from because they think, man, I just got this one little thing and I'm trying to, and before you know it, we're talking and we're getting into it and we're starting to peel back layers, and layer by layer, we're peeling back and finding out there's a problem that started long before you realized you were procrastinating, long before you realized you couldn't trust in relationships, long before you realized you didn't have the aspirations to go higher, that you wanted to hide in the corner of comfort. It's way beyond that. There's something deeper, and we get back there, and it's because you were violated. Not until we own this. Not until, and the crazy thing is, the idea when we say incest, the image that comes up is dirty old man, young girl. It's everything in between. I'm telling you, I've got clients molested by brothers, clients molested by sisters, boys molested by women. And there's this idea within the community is because you're a boy and you experience your first sexual experience with an adult woman, you the man, you the boy, but don't realizing that he's not emotionally and mentally ready to process that yet. You caught him at a time in self-discovery or before self-discovery. So now he's questioning his manhood. He's questioning his place. He's questioning who he is. And now he's no good to anyone who comes along because he doesn't even know who he is. And in order to be a true man in a true situation, in a real relationship, you got to know who you are, because you're going to be challenged. You're going to be questioned. There's going to be time the people you're covering you are going to need you to be who you are, because they're kind of skeptical. You can't possibly be everything you need to be if you're still questioning who you are. You have to have a clear understanding of self. And when someone is violated physically, emotionally, and definitely sexually, it taps into the core part of their mentality that identifies them. All kind of questions arise. Am I not valuable enough to protect? What's wrong with me that attracts that type of behavior? You see how kids process stuff? Kids generally process things that's going wrong as if it's their fault. Kids blame themselves for divorces that their parents are responsible for. What makes you think that when something like that happens, they're not blaming themselves? And when no one addresses it, when no one sits down with them right after it happens. Now, granted, some of them aren't telling. Some of them are not divulging because they've been told if they told, somebody's going to get hurt, somebody's going to get killed. So they've sit on it for years. And to the point, some of them have suppressed it to where they don't even believe it until it comes out. Now it breaks down, and now it's like it just happened. And now I'm 30, I'm 40, I'm 50. I've got clients in their 60s coming to the reality of this, literally in their 60s. Trying to make sense of something that happened 50 years ago. You think it doesn't follow you? Yes, ma'am, mermaid money. Yes, ma'am. Sitting up blaming the child. That's the easy out for hiding the dysfunction, the toxicity, and error in the family structure that we refuse to deal with. I can't tell you how many of these young ladies, and I've had a couple of young men, but with the young ladies, it's so prevalent, it's overwhelming. And I just got a thing about men protecting women that makes it just really frustrating. But don't get it twisted. It's just as devastating for young boys. And in some ways, more devastating because we're expecting them to grow up and be the protectors. We're expecting them to grow up and be the leaders. We're expecting them to grow up and handle everything that comes out so that everyone can feel safe and function. But we've robbed them long before they could develop, long before they had a true sense of self. We robbed them. So yes, please don't dismiss this as just being something that women deal with and only harms women. It's way more than that. And I knew that I wouldn't get the response, and I won't get the response on this that I got on the whole Kwame thing, because we are trained to be sensational in pursuit. If it's not sensationalism, we're not gravitating toward it. We're not attracted to it. We're not really truly interested in healing. We're interested in being entertained. We like to see what other people are going through. Why? Because it's a form of escapism. It allows me to get away for just a moment with what I'm dealing with. Jeffrey, you're on it again. That's the thing. We're in this place where we want to pretend. And anything that takes us out of this pretentious state and makes us look in the mirror at ourselves as a collective, we tend to shy away from. We don't want to deal with the elephant in the room. This conversation isn't a new concept, a new idea, or a new reality. It's been a reality for decades. I remember, I'm 50, I'll be 54 in 2 months. I remember growing up in the community and trying to make sense of a fact that one of my friends has just had a child who is both her son and her little brother. And the people in the neighborhood know. And it's normalized. It's kind of squeezed. And eventually the child doesn't realize. And then we don't even think about the offspring of such relationships and how they are going to have to come up with a sense of identity, where they're going to have questions of, was I even wanted? Where do I fit into this? How can I be proud of this type of heritage? Don't get it twisted either that this is only a Black thing. No, there's some sick people out there in every race, and there's a race that's way sicker than we are. But see, that's where we got to stop too. We got to stop comparing ourselves. Well, they deal with it. Well, they do it. They deal with. I don't care what anyone. I teach my kids. I don't care what anyone else is doing. We're talking about being the best we can be in this house. While I want everybody out there to be okay, I got to take care of home first. And with me, after I deal with my true home, my next home is my people. And so I study, I read, I create, I develop. Why? Because there is something that has to be done. We are not in a state right now of being triumphant. We're in a state of defeat. That's why it's so easy to overtake us. We're in a state of defeat. We defeat kids before they ever get out of the house. We keep breaking them down before they get out of the house. So what? Yours weren't molested in the house. They weren't victims of incest. But you're robbing them of their imagination before they can ever get to a point where they can truly do something with themselves. You've already told them what they're not going to be, how they're not going to be. You've already reminded them a million times that white people are better than them by how you cower to the white people. You've already stood up and told them who they are. So they go out into a world with fear. They don't go out prepared and empowered. They go out fearful and uncertain. You can teach self-love without ever teaching hate. And you will produce someone that will be remarkable and unstoppable. You never have to preach hate when you teach self-love. Why? Self-love will protect itself from hatred. But you can't keep breaking the next generation and expecting the next generation to be the generation that finally gets it done. We are going to have to deal with the true reality of where we're at as a race, internally, externally, and socially. But we can't stop there. We're going to have to be willing to get some help. We're going to have to be willing to seek healing as individuals and as a collective. We're going to have to start becoming enamored with the beauty of who we are as individuals and as a collective. We're going to have to start establishing a standard greater than the standard we're currently living by. We're going to have to start holding those in our communities who are not for pro-social behavior accountable. If you're not healing us, you're hurting us. If you're not lifting us, you're drawing us down. We cannot sit up and condone behavior. And let me explain something to you. There's something known as silent condemnation, meaning that I am not openly saying I approve of what you do, but my silence is saying I approve. And what does that mean? There are certain things you have to be willing to speak out against. There are certain things you have to be willing to stand up for. We are going to have to be pro-social as Black individuals so that we are pro-performance, pro-win as Black people as a race. You can't expect the race to function when individual parts are suffering. There's an old saying, your chain is only strong as the weakest link, and it is. It cannot function beyond the capacity of the weakest link. We have a responsibility to the community. We have a responsibility to our families. We have a responsibility, most importantly, to ourselves and to our higher self, our higher divine self, our connection to God. We have a responsibility to be the best we can be and to hold ourselves accountable and to hold all those around us accountable and to call a spade, even when that spade exists inside the fold. See, like I said, it's easy to point out road cops. It's easy to point out financial institutions, school institutions, and all the other things where we can easily see discrimination and the mishandling and mistreatment of Black people. It's easy to point out those things. Why? Because it's outside. It makes us a victim and it makes them a perpetrator. And we can sit up and say, look what they're doing to us. But what happens when we have to look inside and say, look what we're doing to ourselves? And it's not just in this one area, but this area, we've got to deal with it. We cannot have a number as high as 60 and at best 40 of our women coming out of homes before they're 18 being violated. We've got to look at the normalization of the type of thinking that would even produce something like that. What kind of thinking produces a behavior that violates babies? Yes, they're babies. If they're still under the covering of a parent, they're still a babies, for as I'm saying. They may be evolving and growing. It's not until we have prepared them and put them out in a world ready to go to work and do what they're capable of doing that they're no longer babies. And they're still our children. They still are our responsibility. Go back to the beginning of what I said. We're talking about a genetic reality. We're not just talking about some experience or some superficial emotional idea of something. We're talking about all the way down to the genetic level. What's happening when that happens? We've got to do something different. We've got to change the narrative. We've got to start holding people accountable. For those of you who have been through it, it's time to seek help. It's time to heal. Healing is possible. My wife is absolute proof of that. Wow. I'm just reading what the True Raw family just shared. It says, my ex married a woman at the age of 16, and she had 20 years on him. I can imagine he was a hot mess. That was not an appropriate situation for so many different reasons. And the idea that somebody thought that was okay is crazy, you know, and we don't look at things. We want to, I mean, and another thing is we have to stop allowing society to create our normality because everyone else is doing it. It's okay. No, you have to have a standard that is established, that is conducive and supportive to what you say you desire to be. And in many instances, that will not look like everything everyone else is doing. Sorry about that. Thought it may have been something important. But there's a lot that has to be addressed. There are a lot of elephants in the room. There's so much. And I touch on this in my 19th book, which is Born in Captivity, my 22nd book, which is Undoing the African-American Mind. I touch on this heavily because it's something that has a massive impact on our ability to normalize and be pro-social as a collective. It's hard to be pro-social when you're carrying that type of hurt and pain, that type of trauma. And we've been told so much that slavery has been 150 years, been over 155 years, that we start to believe that time, that lie, that time heals all wounds. I can tell you as a professional, no, it doesn't. Time does not heal all wounds. A wound, a true wound, is first of all going to leave a scar. It's going to be there. Time does not heal all wounds. Now, time properly used to heal will facilitate the healing process, which takes time. But it takes effort. It takes focus. It takes focusing on the right thing. It takes acknowledgement of certain things. It takes letting go of other things. It takes focusing and looking forward to something better, something greater. It takes looking inside and seeing something worth living. It takes all of that. Just simply existing will not create healing. So the fact that we're 155 years out of slavery has absolutely nothing to do with where we are right now. The fact is, we've never had any type of collective intervention when it comes to what our ancestors dealt with as slaves. It wasn't like they said, okay, it's 1865. We're going to line our slaves up. We're going to give them 2 or 3 years of counseling. We're going to follow up with this. We're going to give them that. We're going to give them proper footing. Matter of fact, what actually happened was we said slavery was over. We promised them 40 acres and a mule, which they didn't get. We shut that down because they killed the president, and the one that came in behind him killed it. So they didn't get their 40 acres and a mule, which would have gave them financial footing. So then what happened? We had 12 years of Reconstruction, something that we like to try to put in a positive light. But the truth of the matter was Reconstruction was the South rebuilding its antebellum roots. In other words, treating blacks the way it always had treated blacks, with the exception that you could not be legally considered a slave. But when you look at convict leasing, when you look at sharecropping, we pretty much got put back out in the field for little or nothing. That wasn't the end, though. We had black codes. Black codes said you couldn't own a business. And again, interrupting your ability to become financially autonomous. Then you had 70 years of Jim Crow, which you could just be lynched for looking in the wrong way at a white woman or a white man. Nothing be done. Matter of fact, they were having picnics at lynchings. 70 years of Jim Crow. 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 70 They were making postcards from the pictures they took at lynchings. Things that would now be considered evidence to prosecute for murder was normal. So there's this thing called traumatic re-injury. See, we're not only not healing, we're being re-injured. If I punch you in your face and I break your jaw, that's physical trauma. If you go get your jaw reset and you get your mouth wired, which is normally how they deal with a broken jaw, and you protect your jaw will heal. But just imagine, I hit you in your face and I break your jaw. You never go get your jaw reset or wired. So now it's not even in the proper position to heal correctly. It's going to heal off you, probably going to have problems talking, chewing, and a bunch of other things for the rest of your life because you never really got it reset. But now imagine I come along and hit you in it again. More damage, more devastation, and less chance of it ever healing properly. That's what traumatic re-injury does as well. It says you're not healing, but I'm going to kick you again. So now on top of trauma, and what we call this, a lot of people talk about PTSD, and I know that Dr. Jordan Gray talked about post-traumatic slave syndrome. Well, see, actually what we're dealing with isn't PTSD. PTSD normally happens from one traumatic event. Something happens so traumatic that it messes you up and you really need an intervention to get back to some sense of normality. That's PTSD. When you send a soldier off, they normally come back with some form of PTSD. No, what we're talking about is something little known as complex trauma. Complex trauma is when you stack trauma on top of one another. You're not dealing with it, you're just stacking it. Can you imagine trying to heal from it? Nobody's confronting it. When people talk about it, we don't want to really deal with it. When somebody comes up with a solution, we don't want to really back it. There are people out there that need healing, but nobody is stepping up. Nobody is sitting up and saying, we've got to create the environment. I've done the best I could. I got frustrated. I've decided that I'm going to come back stronger. I don't know how yet, but I trust that my relationship with the divine is going to produce the answer. It always does. And I'm going to figure out a way to make things happen. I would love to have you guys support it because it needs to be a national network of resources that people can tap into for young boys without fathers, for young girls without fathers and mothers, for young girls who have been abused, for young girls that are caught up in the system, something that Marion did. Something that Marion did and does is deal with young girls who are behind bars, underage, but in detention because of situations. She counsels, she consults, she loves on those babies. She deals with them even after they get out. And I do something similar with what I do. But the thing is, we've got to sit up and say, okay, enough is enough. Pretending something didn't happen doesn't mean it didn't happen. Pretending that it doesn't exist doesn't mean it's not working on the inside to destroy. You can't pretend trauma away. You're going to have to confront it. You're going to have to deal with it. We're going to have to deal with this on a large scale. It's the reality. We can talk Black group economics till we're purple in the face. We can talk access into finance. We can talk the killing of gentrification. But if we don't deal with the internal issues that we are facing, it doesn't mean anything because we're not equipped to build right now. Most of us are destroying ourselves. That's the reality. We're easily misled. We're easily distracted because what we want, escapism. We want to pretend we're good. We want to pretend we're there already. We want to have things that make us look important to other people. Why? Because we're not sure of who we are ourselves. When you become sure of who you are yourself, you don't need something to show somebody else who you are. They'll see it in your presentation of who you are and how you stand, your gait, the way you square your shoulders, the way you hold your chin up high, the way you move, the way you touch. When you're touching lives, you're showing who you know who you are. When you know who you are, you don't need things. There's nothing wrong with things, but they have to be in their proper perspective. My things don't define me. Because see, I've been where I had nothing and nothing about me changed. People who know me will tell you. Nothing about me changed when I was homeless and had nothing. And I came from having everything to get to that point. I could have felt embarrassed. I could have felt shame. All I knew is that I'm the same man with zero as I was with all those other numbers in front of the zero. And I lived my life accordingly. And my goal was not to get back what I lost, but to remain effective in touching lives while I'm at my worst. And I built and came back off of that. But you better know who you are when life hits you. That's one of the problems we're struggling with. Nobody knows who they are because we've been defined by so many things outside of ourselves. And we've been suffering from so many things inside of ourselves that the things outside feel better. You can never be who you're going to be until you become acquainted with who you are. I love all of my sisters, and my goal is to find a place where our sisters feel safe. I love every last one of my brothers, and my goal is to empower them to step into true Black manhood in a way that sends a message to this world, not on my watch. But there's got to be some healing for that to happen. We've got to stop pretending for that to happen. On that note, look, I'm going to get out of here. I hope that what I shared with you touched. But here's the thing that I'm going to leave you with. We will only get as far. We will only get as high as our women can spiritually elevate us. And we will only get as far as our men physically lead us. We have to do this together. To think we can get somewhere with only one of us functioning, we need to merge the masculine energy of our men with the feminine energy of our women. We need to create an environment where our children can be properly inculcated with the values, interests, and principles that will send them on a course of true liberation. It's the only way. We can talk all day about all that other strategic stuff, but if we don't deal with self, it's going to be for no reason. I absolutely love every last one of y'all. You don't have to like me for it to do it. I'm not here for likes. I'm not here for any of that. If I share something, if I plant a seed, and I shared this with a young man that reached out to me, actually through one of my clients. He reached out to me, and he knew they had been talking about me. He knew of me, and he asked her to, would it be okay for him to reach out? I said, tell him, yeah. He reached out and we talked. And one of the things I shared with him is that we as a people have to be aware of who we are. And here's the thing. One of the last things I shared with him is we need men who are willing to plant seeds that they will not live long enough to see come to fruition. And he got it. Very sharp young man. He got it. What I mean by that is we live in a world where everybody is a part of a microwave society where everybody wants their pat on the back now. So everybody's out for accolades. Everybody's out to be recognized. And so nobody's putting in any type of long-term work because it doesn't produce immediate gratification. But the problem is you can't have long-term results that are in alignment with what you say you want now if you're not working on it now. So what we actually have to have are men who are willing to speak into the lives of young men my age, speaking into the lives of 30 and 20-year-olds and teenagers, planting seeds in the minds and hearts of young women, telling young girls and young women that you're beautiful. That's a constant serenade in my house with my daughters, all the way up to the one that'll be 36 in September. She heard all the time growing up, you're beautiful. You're absolutely gorgeous. You can do anything you put. Why? I'm serenading her with a seed that over time would be cultivated by me, but eventually will take root and grow into the woman she has become. A mother of 3, a wife of 14 years, married her first. That came from a lot of hard work. I'm not in any way claiming to be a perfect parent. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is that seed that was planted 35 years ago is still growing out and taking root and producing fruit. If all I cared about what was going to happen at that moment, she might not be the woman she is today. But that has to be done on a collective level as well. That has to be done on a collective level. You've got to sit up and start planting seeds. We got too many men that want a pat on the back now. They want to be recognized as the XYZ of this time. I'm not trying to be anybody. I've got some people I have a lot of respect for that set and laid the foundation. I'm not trying to be any of them. I'm trying to take what they gave me and take it further, and then hand the torch to more people who are younger, more enthusiastic, have more energy, and then become the voice in their ear that pushes them further. But I have to be willing to sit up and say that I may not get my just due until it's my legacy speaking of me and not my present. Do you get it? Do you get it? I'm talking about speaking into the lives of people in a way that it's not an immediate return. It's a long-term investment. It's something where you're sitting up and you're speaking power. You're planting seeds. You're working with young boys who are too young to take action now, but need you to guide them. So you won't get to see the fruit until 20 or 30 years from now. 20 or 30 years from now, I might not be here. But see, if I planted the seed, my legacy will speak for me through them. I tell people all the time, the first half of my life was about me, but the second half is about my legacy. I don't really worry too much about what people think now. I want to know that my legacy will speak of me in totality, not just the wins, not just the losses, not just the ups, but my whole legacy will say that man came and he gave life everything he had, and the world is a better place because of it. I live my life on full every day so that I die on E. That's my challenge to my people. We've got to heal, but it starts at a point. We've got to heal. I'm going to leave you guys with that. I hope that in some way my message resonated with some of you. If it did, pass it on to others. But most importantly, embody it. Become a part of the solution. That's what I'm challenging you to do. On that note, I'm out of here. I've got so much more to do, but I had to come and deal with that. This is going to be an ongoing conversation because it's so deep, but it was just so weighing on me because the last two clients I just taken on, same situation. We've got to do a better job of protecting our youth, our kids, while they are children. We've got to definitely do a better job of protecting our women. On that note, I'm out of here. You guys have a great day.